Conversation with a Geographer. I'm Mike DeVivo, professor of geography at Grand Rapids Community College. And today we're very fortunate to have Paul Stars, emeritus professor of geography at the University of Nevada. Paul, thanks so much for coming here today.
It's a great pleasure to be here with you, Mike.
I wish our weather in Michigan was like what you had out there.
What can I say? When you got a day like this in the San Francisco Bay Area, you just have to run with it.
And you might as well. You might as well. Paul, like many of these interviews, I'm going to ask you to think about your background, your early years. What might have inspired you to pursue geography? Was there something in your childhood? Would you care to comment on any incidents, episodes, experiences like that?
Well, there's no doubt that some people are born geographers and other people just get lucky and have an early life that steers them toward a geographer's career. And so I was born abroad. I was actually born in Bordeaux, France, and I'm the child of diplomats. And so a lot of my early life, up until the time I was ready to go off to university, was spent in foreign countries. And France at first, back to the DC suburbs, then back to Spain for almost 7 years. Mm-hmm. And then from there, back to Guatemala for a couple of years, and eventually back to DC where I went to high school. So it's been an interesting run, but I have to say, I'm convinced that people who get a lot of chances to see new and different places oftentimes realize that, hey, there's a lot of differences in the world and it's good to know about them. And so that's sort of been my philosophy. Keep moving, keep seeing new things, and make the most of it. And it's been good. It's been a good life so far. No complaints, and I'm hoping to keep it going for a while longer.
Well, we hope so, too. There's a lot that you still have to offer. So you went to high school in the Washington, D.C. area.
McLean, Virginia, of all places.
Okay, McLean, Virginia. And then from there, did you go to Deep Springs?
I went from the D.C. suburbs in all their glory over to Deep Springs College in easternmost California.
Would you comment on Deep Springs?
From the border with Nevada.
Yeah. Would you comment
on a different place, a different experience?
Offer our viewers and listeners an idea of really what Deep Springs College is all about.
Oh.
We don't have more than a couple minutes for this part.
No, yeah. Deep Springs College was established by an eccentric billionaire in his day. He purchased the land for Deep Springs College the college actually began in 1917 and proceeded on from there. And so it's got a 106-year history at this point. Until 2018, it was a single-sex, all-male institution. And Deep Springs, the founder of Deep Springs, Lucian L. Nunn, really believed that Westerners, kids raised in the Western United States in particular, had gone through a series of adaptations to the landscapes in which they lived, and that all he really needed to do to turn them into crackerjack engineers and people serving the public interest was to educate them properly. And so Deep Springs College was created in an incredibly rural environment. It's the only entity in a valley, basically on the Nevada border. And it admits, the total student body, I think right now, is 26 to 30 students. Mm-hmm. Right now, basically split male and female, although there's no rules and regulations about keeping it that way. And so Deep Springs, when I went there in 1975, was an all-male institution in a valley that's 14 miles long and 6 miles wide, east of the White Mountains in easternmost California. And part of the education at Deep Springs is learning how to work. And I don't mean academic work. I mean, go out and work on the ranch, clean up the grease pit, do trash runs, work in the alfalfa fields, harvesting alfalfa, taking care of the livestock, moving them up to 13,000 feet in the White Mountains in a great trailing drive. And all these things are part of the Deep Springs experience. But the other thing that's interesting about Deep Springs, and I'll be brief, is that it was founded on the principles of self-governance. And so students are supposed to make many of the major decisions for who to bring in, what courses they'd be interested in, what kind of changes they think should be brought about on the ranch or on the teaching faculty. And all of this has been going on for over 100 years. And it's kind of an amazing story, but it definitely creates new and different people. And probably the biggest pillar of Deep Springs' existence is a conviction that students, once they graduate, should try to commit themselves to a life of service. And so, fortunately for me, part of the Deep Springs ethos in the day that I was there and since then has been to teach and work in a university. And so I dove in on that, not by any kind of planning. It was kind of a coincidence that I went into that, but Deep Springs was a great 2-year plus in my case, early education, because I actually was one of the students who was picked to go up into the mountains and be with the cattle herd. 375 head in those days. It was an interesting existence.
I can well imagine, and it was certainly as different an experience as you can get from going on to University of California in La Jolla, of all places.
Absolutely. Well, I had a sister who, the older of my two sisters, did an undergraduate degree at UC San Diego. And she said, I think you might really like it. There's surfing. It's up on a mesa. San Diego is great. And I thought, well, I'll come down and visit her. And I fell in love with the place. It was fantastic. It was one of the campuses that University of California President Clark Kerr established in the early 1960s in his attempt to expand the University of California system to take in some new campuses, which were Santa Cruz, UC Irvine, and UC San Diego. And so it was great going there. And I have to say, set me up well for going on to earn a master's degree and a PhD later on in geography, which is in its own way an interesting story.
Well, before we get to that, at UCSD, you pursued studies in utopian literature and utopian studies, essentially.
Absolutely. Yes. Which was an interesting choice, but Deep Springs is someplace that makes you think about community, about authority, and I got quite interested in that and interested in this portrayal of both utopian and also dystopian society.
Or one might say, and that era was anti-utopian.
Absolutely.
You have communities.
And so you look at this and there's this, it's, or maybe it's more like this. It's a teeter-totter. And there's no doubt that in American life and life worldwide, that some utopias can turn out to be pretty darn dystopian and bring along with them an awful lot of
indeed.
ugly
and there was a wide body of literature being produced for university classrooms right about the time you entered UCSD. And so I would see that Deep Springs to utopian studies at UCSD to geography at Berkeley to be really an interesting and very, very nicely fitting segue from one path to another.
And who would have guessed?
Well, you couldn't plan that yourself.
That this would come together. But it was, I remember still, and I was sorting out my office not too long ago at home, and I found the statement of purpose that I had written for going to graduate school at Berkeley. And that statement of purpose said, essentially, some people watch the sky, I prefer to watch the land. And so apparently that resonated with some of the faculty in geography at UC Berkeley when I was applying to go there. And although at that point, I was living in Taipei with my wife, she wanted to work on her Chinese, and I figured I might as well pick up an additional language. And so we were there, and I corresponded with the admissions office at UC Berkeley and got a
no email at the time.
Yeah, right, exactly. And they said, "Hey, we're looking forward to having you come on over."
That's great. So for your master's degree, do you have any fond memories concerning fellow students, professors, and research that you engaged in?
I was lucky enough to have gone to Berkeley in 1982. Actually, 1981 is when I started. And, I had a great cohort of colleagues, women and men who were incredibly talented and curious, and all moving toward exploring what geography was and what it could mean for them and for the world around them. And it was just a great bunch of people. And so I made the most of that. And a big part of graduate school, in my mind, is your association, not just with the faculty, which is always important, and you got to keep them happy, but also with fellow students. And we would go out on long road trips. And I remember one of the road trips that I went on was with Jerry Emery, Dave Larson. We got on the Union Pacific train that went from Oakland, California to Denver, and went to the AAG meeting in Denver, and this was as a first-year graduate student. It was a great experience to see geographers in action. And I remember some things I remember so well. There was John Fraser Hart standing at the top of the elevator, or the escalator, pardon me, that went on up. And Fraser was just always a presence at these meetings. And you look at this and you just go, wow, this is kind of curious.
His bow tie right there.
Absolutely. Yes. And now that I think he's the oldest working geographer in the country, it's interesting to think back to those days.
It is. And those were days when AAG meetings were characterized by nearly all men wearing ties and a jacket.
That's right. I think I was probably part of the early 1980s group that began to sort of break that apart. It became less and less an old white guys club and more a means for people to gather and share ideas, and sometimes outrage and confusion, but oftentimes just to share their research and see how we could connect up with one another and maybe, just maybe, make the world a little bit better place.
Well, one other comment I'd like to accentuate that you made is that it was really an old white guys club, and that posture was not relinquished with much
Great.
willingness. You know,
Yes.
well, no, not much grace either. Yes, yes. There was a high level of reluctance for many of the older white males to give up their status, and this was also at a time when women were a significant minority.
They were a significant minority, and that's certainly something that has changed among academic geographers and really in geographers in general around the country, with they're working for the private sector or government or any of a variety of other venues where geographers can become important players. And it's
And I think it's a good thing.
I think it's a good thing.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely no argument for me. And I had a number of, I think the class at Berkeley that I came in on was pretty close to 50% female. And many of the women graduate students were the brightest lights in the geography department at Berkeley in those days. And went on, I might add, because Berkeley's always had an outsized influence on academic departments in the United States. And in particular, Berkeley PhDs have always been, have almost always been welcomed in other places as a breath of fresh air and as representing a different kind of tradition in geography. And that continues even today.
It does. It does. So at Berkeley, you worked with James Parsons.
I actually worked with Jim Parsons and with Jay Vance, who was an urban transportation historical geographer, and with Ted Oberlander, who was a geomorphologist. And
he had a textbook in physical geography.
He sure did. Absolutely. And Jay had a number of books that actually were used as textbooks. Jim Parsons, because he came from a background in journalism, in local journalism, tended to think of things in smaller chunks. And he loved doing articles.
And he was perhaps, I don't know if he was the most eclectic, but certainly one of the most eclectic scholars in the history of Berkeley geography.
No argument. Absolutely. And he just kept looking for new outlets, whether it was the changing location of prime meridians or whether it was why are the Canary Islands called the Canary Islands? Where are pilots choosing to live in California and the American West? And of course, I followed in his footsteps by doing a lot of work in the oak woodlands, both of Spain and Portugal, and also in California and the American West. And you know that he was my leader in a lot of that. And actually, he came out when I got a Fulbright after I finished my PhD. He came out and spent 3 weeks just traveling around Spain with me because he was curious what I had learned and to see if I could pass it along to him. So it was, what a privilege and what an interesting person.
And a very kind man as well.
He was, absolutely. No argument about that. He was just great. And I'm sure he was the reason I got into Berkeley, because he loved that notion that there was somebody who was fundamentally enamored of the idea of landscape. And I still am, I have to say. I know the landscape geography special interest group in the AAG sees things as oftentimes more of a theoretical concept, but I like landscape as evidence. For me, that's what really gets me going. I can say that.
Well, what kind of story is the landscape telling us?
You got it. Exactly.
That's so much of it.
And how many stories. I've always loved Patricia Nelson Limerick's book, The Legacy of Conquest, because in there she emphasizes that, well, the legacy of conquest really could be conquests because there were so many different groups with so many different stories in the occupation of the North American continent. She said you need to pay attention to all of them because they're all relevant, and every group is going to have its own means, its own techniques for interacting with landscape. And so I got that from Patty and from Jim, and Jay Vance was much the same. And later on, I got to work with people like Pierce Lewis, Don Meinig.
And Pierce Lewis's presidential address, Beyond Description, is classic. It's something that should still be read and reread.
And it just, and you read it and then you end up with your engine revved up. It's like, let me out there. Let me go work on this.
And Meinig's Historical Geography Imperative, also another classic.
You bet.
But I'm going to ask you to take a step back to Berkeley for a moment.
Sure.
Can you recall any time, any incident that you might be able to share with us the essence of learning geography at Berkeley? The students or faculty that you might have engaged in dialogue with, a seminar, a bit of field work. Is there anything that you can share with us that can give us just in a nutshell, what was it like to be at Berkeley in the 80s?
Yeah, at Berkeley in the 80s, even early on, the first course that I took was a seminar in historical geography from Jim Parsons. And there were a dozen of us, maybe 15 of us in the seminar. And it was held on the top of what was then the Earth Sciences building. And with a view from the Earth Sciences building straight out at the main library, at Doe Library. And really at the reference room in the main library, which was an interesting kind of significant location in Berkeley geographical history. But, I was learning what historical geography was. And this ties back actually to finishing my undergraduate degree at UC San Diego, because I had two professors who were my mentors in doing an undergraduate honors degree. And one was Armin Rappaport, who had taught at Berkeley before. He actually taught a class where my father was his chief teaching assistant in Wheeler Auditorium, which is interesting. But that was very early on in Armin's career. He was one of those people that was bribed away from Berkeley to go to UC San Diego. He was, if I remember correctly, the founding dean of the College of Arts and Science at UC San Diego. And my other teacher was Roy Harvey Pierce, who came from Ohio State and various other places, but he was an expert on historicism, which is essentially the argument that it's important to look at phenomena like literature and music and other cultural activities in order to understand past people and past places. And so those two, I remember going to each of them and saying, maybe I should try this graduate school thing. And Armin said, you should, and it should be at Berkeley. And I sort of looked at him and I thought, oh my God. I thought he liked me. And Roy Harvey Pierce had basically the same answer. And my reaction was, when I went to high school in McLean, Virginia, the person that taught the only geography course was, can you guess, Mike? It was the basketball coach.
Oh, well, okay.
And you look at this and you just go, well, they picked a subject that they figured that was probably the only thing they figured he could teach. And you just look at this and you just go,
which was not
so
uncommon.
I was shocked.
Oh.
But then I began to explore what geography actually was, and in particular what historical geography was. And I realized both these folks were correct, that geography was a great place for somebody like me. And so I went to Berkeley, and it paid off. I think it's safe to say.
And you found yourself in this historical geography seminar with Jim Parsons.
And did my first seminar paper for Jim and for the fellow students in the class on Basque sheep herders and their arrival in the United States.
Well, you were in their neighborhood at Deep Springs, more or less. So there you go.
Absolutely, you bet. And so that was part of the fun, was going and realizing that, and this is one of the things that many a geographer realizes, is that sometimes chance or passing events from our youth can have really significant effects on the sorts of things that we get interested in and the sort of things that we end up researching and writing about.
There you go. So you were awarded the doctorate at Berkeley, and then you went to...
Then I actually taught at Berkeley for a couple of years. They kept me on to teach California geography, geography of the American West. As I recall, I may have taught in a historical geography class. Jay was probably on sabbatical or something like that. And an introduction to human cultural geography. So I got a handful of courses sent my way, which was great background for preparing me for going off to the University of Nevada at Reno, where I applied for and got a job that I started in 1992.
So you had just begun engaging in field work in Mexico, and at that time?
In Mexico, and actually when I finished my PhD, I got a Fulbright to go to Spain and study how management of the traditional oak, Spanish, Portuguese oak woodlands had changed thanks to a small legal change in the Spanish code that made it possible for landowners to profit from leasing hunting rights on their land. An exotic topic, to be sure. And I remember showing up in Madrid, and Ana Maria Mingote was the person who was administering the Fulbright program in Spain. And we had a gathering, and I was to be introduced to the other students or other people who had gotten Fulbrights. There was a young guy about my age, probably late 20s, early 30s, who was interested in Roman coins and their distribution around the Spanish landscape. There was a young woman who was interested in Siglo de Oro literature, so Cervantes and people of that ilk. There were people who were interested in all manner of sort of traditional humanities and rarely social science, but there were a few who were interested in sort of social science themes. I went there to study hunting and how the modalities of hunting were changing with time. And I have to admit, Ana Maria thought this was just fascinating, and the other people were just, they couldn't believe that somebody could, that was
get a Fulbright
subject of academic endeavor. And, it took a while, but I made friends with Spanish colleagues and field scientists. We'd call them ecological scientists for the most part these days. Did lots of work with the Ministry of Agriculture. And, you learn as you go.
Absolutely.
And that field work was invaluable to me. And then about 15 years later, my wife and I and Spanish colleagues and a couple of other American friends did a big book comparing the management of the oak woodlands in Spain and Portugal and in California. And this is what you can do when you have good collaborations and
Oh,
good
absolutely.
collaborators. They're great people, and we're still in touch
Well,
with a lot of them, and many are doing well, and we still work on many of the same sorts of themes.
it
It's great.
sounds like a lot of fun and a lot of bottles of Tempranillo.
A lot of bottles of Tempranillo and Ribera del Duero, and uh, I know
Absolutely.
it's hard for you to imagine, but yes, we did relatively well in the wine world and sherry world, um, and my wife to this day is still working on trying to produce the perfect licor de bellota, the acorn liqueur but using California acorns rather than Spanish acorns. Part of the fun.
Well, I prefer Benedictine, but I'd like to try some of that. There we go. So,
Or given where I was born, um, there's things like Calvados out there.
the Calvados is something that's very endearing. We both know.
Yes,
but
couldn't agree more.
you had done some field work in Chiapas and Oaxaca also.
Also, absolutely. I went down there with Les Roundtree, and we were interested in who wrote another person that wrote a cultural geography textbook, one of the best of them. And yeah, Les and I went down to Chiapas and wandered around, and it was a great experience. Although I have to admit that we did pick up a rental car that was not in the best of condition when we got it. And I remember that when we pulled back to the airport, I looked at Les and I said, I think we run for it. And and sure enough, at some point going down the road, the rural, very rural dirt roads toward Guatemala, we actually, I think we further cracked an oil pan. And so by the time we pulled into the parking lot for the quote unquote rental car company, we were dripping. We were leaving a trail. Let's put it that way. But we survived that experience, and Avis never charged us for anything. They just got it fixed and went on from there.
Well, that's good. And that was at a time when, it was before the revolution, before the Zapatista uprising.
Right.
And it was also at a time when perhaps as much as half of the population in Chiapas could not speak Spanish. They only spoke indigenous tongues,
Yep. Yep.
That's,
and we were doing work all through southern Mexico, just cutting back and forth. I didn't actually make it to Cancun and Merida until more recently. But yeah, Les and I just traveled around, and we were talking to people about, what sort of economies do you see coming in? And, one of the interesting things is that from a political economy point of view, areas like production of mezcal were really just starting to come online.
in Oaxaca, yes.
In Oaxaca, absolutely. In Oaxaca in particular. And you look at this and just realize how things have changed or continued to develop over the last 30 years. And this is in truth what, for me, field work as a geographer is all about, is getting out there and seeing things and talking to people in particular. That for me is the essence of what we do, is not going there and doing these sort of windshield surveys of staring around and maybe every 10 kilometers getting out and taking a photograph. It's really about going and paying attention to what people there know. That for me is what cultural human geography is all about. And, it bears not just on on cultural, on sort of social sciences and humanities research. It also bears very much on physical geography.
Absolutely.
And the sort of people that do physical geography. We learn.
Absolutely.
And we learn from locals, which is
we try to figure out
important.
what makes the landscape tick. The why of where. What is the why of
The
where?
why, that's a beautiful way of putting it. The why of where is a huge part of my style of geography. Let's put it that way.
Sure.
And I don't want to be prescriptive and say everybody should do this. I know there are people out there who are shy and don't feel they can go and talk to people, or they're not strong enough in their language skills. I had a huge leg up because from living in Spain and Guatemala, my Spanish was basically pretty fluent. And by the time I'd been doing research in Spain in the 1990s and the early 2000s, I could give an hour and a half long lecture in a classroom in Spain and in Spanish and survive the experience. Let's put it that way.
Sure. Well, and this kind of geography that you're talking about, it's a lot of fun. It's a great joy.
If it's not fun, why are we doing it?
Absolutely. Well, well, concomitantly, we are hopefully making a contribution to humanity. But let's talk about your experience now as a professor at the University of Nevada, Reno. You were chair of a department for a while.
Oh, chair of a department for 3 years. And one of the interesting things to me, Mike, is I look at a number of my colleagues and the people that I really look up to and respect, and there's so many of us who recognized finally, after putting it off for years and years and years, that our number was up, and we had to step in and take a turn as a department chair. I did it for 3 years. Don Meinig did it for 3 years. Jim Parsons did it for a little bit longer because he was called back after doing it for 3 years. But and God bless people who like those sorts of administrative jobs. I took my 3-year term as department chair and decided I wanted to hire as many good young and oftentimes female faculty as we could, just to diversify and continue to make geography relevant to the University of Nevada in Reno. And but after 3 years, I was thrashed. And
Sure.
I just went, no longer. And I said, find somebody else who's fresher meat can take it on.
There is some rationale behind a Department of Geography having a rotating departmental chair.
You bet.
Where individuals take turns, the chair administers bureaucratic matters along with other things, but everyone knows, at least everyone can be on the same page after a while, and you have the opportunity to influence hiring of good geographers, which is also
absolutely. Oh no!
sensible.
I lost a colleague in one of the years that I was department chair. Really, my best friend in the geography department, Gary Hausladen.
Wonderful fellow. Yeah, he did landscape and literature.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yes. Mystery novels, interesting stuff.
You bet. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
He passed away young.
2013,
really.
a decade ago.
But he was
April
only in his
2013.
60s, I think.
Yes, mid to late 60s. And fortunately, we had a dean who was well inclined toward geography, and so he said, hire somebody to replace Gary. And we brought in Jessie Clark, who was a great choice.
She is amazing. I mean, she's been interviewed on this series. She's great.
Great. No, she's remarkable, and I managed to talk her into coming, and she was just she was and continues to be a breath of fresh air. You just look at this and just go, this is great.
I look at her as one of the bits of evidence that shows that geography has a bright future in our country.
I agree.
You know?
I agree. I
There
sure
you
hope so.
have it. You know?
No, we need it. And we need it not to be too political about it, but we need it. And all you have to do is look at some of the discourse, if we can use that weighty word, in American geography. You look at this in American geography and politics, you look at this and just realize, wow, there's just way too many people that don't know, don't understand, don't care about geography and the differences in the places that we live and the different needs that people have and the different kinds of economies and beliefs that they sustain. Seems to me that that's a big part of what we're about. And
Sure.
Interestingly enough, I was hired at Nevada in part because they needed somebody to teach cartography. I taught cartography, not pen and ink. Well, I did. We actually did do pen and ink assignments, but basically early Macromedia freehand,
Sure.
early Adobe Illustrator maps. Just getting the students in there and getting them comfortable with how to see and how to understand and how to interpret the world
And how to
around.
design. How to design so
How to
that
design.
the
And-
map can be easily interpreted by the viewer.
And I have
Yes.
former students who still write to me and say, thank God, when I took that cartography class from you, you got us all to be interested in fonts and in dingbats and in symbols and all these sorts of cartographic minutia that also really influence how a map looks and how it's interpreted. Part of the strength.
So I think that, you have a wide body of research. You've done many things. You were editor of the Geographical Review. You've written books and articles. One thing that I think is very striking is your two books, really, on California agriculture. The Field Guide and the Colors. Would you care to
Yes.
comment on some striking experiences associated with creating the Field Guide, the field work and doing the Field Guide, as well as the Colors?
Absolutely. The Field Guide to California Agriculture was a spin-off, actually, from the field excursions that I did with fellow graduate students and with Jim Parsons. He would look at us, even in that first historical geography seminar. He would look at us and he'd say, in that distinctly Parsonian voice, well, I'm going to go out into the field on Saturday. Anybody want to come along? And we would all raise our hands, and then we'd end up in the Delta, or we'd end up in the Sacramento Valley around the Sutter Buttes, and Jim always wanted, he told me, and I'm sure he told other people, he always wanted to do a big book, the definitive book on California agriculture. It's so diverse. There's so many different crops. And so Field Guide to California Agriculture was an idea I came up with, and I was thinking about this, trying to go, how exactly to do this? And I was talking to a colleague of mine at the University of Nevada in Reno, Peter Goen, and I said, Peter, would you be interested in doing a book on California agriculture? And he goes, how many products are there, Paul? And I said, I think we'd need to cover about 400 different products. Now that includes, 45 different kinds of lettuce and things like that. But that all gets subsumed into the lettuce category. And so he said, yeah, So we actually got an advance from the University of California Press and used that to pay for travels over 3 summers and actually winters as well, because California crops are diurnal. I mean, you got a lot of different crops being produced in California at different seasons, and we would just go out and travel the backcountry, and almost every place we would go, we'd pull by the side of the road, and Peter would say, "I'm going to go over there and get a panorama of these fields." And so he'd go and take 3 or 4 or 5 different shots and then matrix them all together. This is before iPhones with the panoramic function in them. And I'd stand by the side and I'd go, I'm a pretty good photographer as well. So I would go and take some photographs, but inevitably somebody would pull up and come over and say, pues ustedes qué hacen aquí? And I would say, oh, in Spanish, I would say, we're just here. We're really interested in agriculture, and we're curious about how this field is being worked. And inevitably, like, they would sort of stop and pause and realize that we weren't there to raid the orange crop or something like that, that we were in fact just interested onlookers. And this is in keeping with my sort of lifetime philosophy of geography, which is that, whereas if you're an anthropologist in the old style and you ended up someplace and said, tell me about your kinship structure, people are going to look at you and go, what? If you're a historian and you go to the archives and you're only looking at sort of scholarly printed materials or journals or memoirs, things like that, you get a very partial view. But if you go and talk to people and listen to what they're telling you about what's going on in the field behind them, or where the water comes from, or how much do they have to be on the spot in order to actually make that particular agricultural crop work, they're willing to talk about it because they don't see it as threatening. They don't see it as intrusive. They see it as meaning a kindred spirit who's interested in what they're working on. And I incredibly rarely have run into somebody who's like, well, I don't need to talk to you. These folks, almost all of them Hispanic, so speaking,
they want to share something about their lives because this is a very important part of their lives.
That's what they do. Mm-hmm. Exactly. And and they have family and family relationships, but they're out there and they're working their field and they see somebody there and they go, oh, I better see what's going on. And it's great. There's nothing like it. And that's how I get primary knowledge, from the people that are actually involved in it. And you have to respect that knowledge because it may not all be 100% correct, but chances are they know more about it than I do, or than an awful lot of people who aren't in cooperative extension or something like that. Folks who just sort of wander out don't know what's going on. And this was the philosophy.
They're curious.
But it's the philosophy behind the field guide. Mm-hmm. Is basically, I looked at Peter and I said, I think what we need to do is do a book that answers an essential question. And the essential question is one that we have all come up with. And I know you have as well, as somebody who's traveled California really extensively. You look out there and you go, what in the hell is that? You stop your car, or SUV or whatever it is you're driving. You get out, you walk over there and you go, what is this? And if you don't mind an example, one of my favorite little stories is Peter and I ended up in the San Joaquin Valley sort of on the edges of Tulare Lake, which in those days was dry and now is very wet. And there was a field there, and I looked and I said, Peter, I don't know what that is. So we got out and wandered out into the field, and he kept going, and I stopped and realized there was a little box that was there, a little triangular box, and about 8 inches long. And I looked at the side, dragged out my reading glasses, and I went, oh, Peter, I know what it is, because there were these beautiful pink and white and red flowers. And he said, well, what is it? And I said, that's cotton. Those are the cotton flowers. And I go, we almost never see them, because usually when we see a cotton field, they've already come in and they've flown the field and they've sprayed on the defoliant, and all the leaves have fallen out, and all that's left is the cotton bolls. But when it's just getting ready to kick out the cotton bolls, essentially, it's an incredibly beautiful crop. And so even though we were working on this book that we hope would be semi-definitive on California agriculture, we were learning things all the way along the way. Just great.
That is great. That's
The Colors of California Agriculture, the second book, we finished the field guide, and Elaine Tennant, who was the director of the Bancroft Library, the foremost rare books and historical materials library in California, maybe in the American West, aside from the Huntington, and they sort of run neck and neck. But Elaine came to us and she goes, would you folks be willing to use some of the photographs that you've taken for the field guide and match those up and illustrate how California agriculture has evolved over the last 150 years? And I thought about this for a while, and I asked Peter, and I said, what do you think? And he goes, let's ask her what we can use. And Elaine's answer, which was so gracious and so important, was she said, hey, she goes, essentially anything that you can find in the library that you want to use in the Colors of California Agriculture would be great. And so we did a lovely book. We actually supervised the production of the book because Elaine said, you folks handle it. And I think it's a pretty lovely book.
It's a beautiful book. It really is.
And it gave us a chance to, Mike, to do things that we could not do in the field guide. We could write about Japanese American internment camps. We could write about how agriculture in the Santa Clara Valley changed from agriculture in the Valley of the Heart's Delight, as it was called, to becoming Silicon Valley. And all those stone fruit farmers moved over to Patterson in the San Joaquin Valley. And you look at this and just realize, wow, California agriculture is a living, changing institution. And people have done well with that. Japanese Americans were producing in 1941, when World War II started, Japanese Americans were producing, estimates are, 65% of the field crops, essentially of what we eat from produce stands and whatnot, in California. And
that's an amazing percentage, really.
A phenomenal percentage. And of course, when they were all moved to internment camps, it was a disaster for California agriculture, which is a whole nother theme and features in things. If you're a movie fan, it features in things like East of Eden, for example. From the Steinbeck novel. And you look at this and you go, wow, this is serious stuff.
It's an amazing chapter in the history of California landscapes, and there's just so many of them. They're There really are, and you have really offered so much concerning the historical geography and the cultural geography of the American West. It's if you reflect upon your academic life and again take a look back, you see so much that has been done that helps us understand so much the why of where. It really
The why
does.
of where. It's exactly. And I think back, what's the key to a lot of this? And I think back to maybe that very first seminar that I took with Jim Parsons, and he would look up and he would sort of scrunch his eyes a little bit and he would say, you get out there in the field, you just got to keep moving. And that is just such an essence for many a geographer, is get out there and keep moving and keep having new experiences and keep fitting those new experiences. We all have a kind of mental accordion file where various things get filed in various places. And, with time, that becomes really significant. And I think back also, another one of the people that I made good friends with was Dan Gady, who's now passed away. But
University of Vermont, great cultural biogeographer.
Absolutely, you bet. And in his kind of the volume that he did late in life, kind of about geographical theory, he actually talks about how he had kept a list of the subjects, the topics that he was interested in. And he figured that over the course of his lifetime, there were about 500 different topics that he was interested in. And he said he got to research and write about maybe 150 of them. He started in and abandoned probably another 75 or 100. And the rest he just didn't quite have time to get to in his lifetime. And I have to admit that I keep a list of 2023, and as soon as 2024 comes around, I'll do the same thing. I leave behind the topics that I actually finished writing about in 2023, and I will move everything that I haven't gotten to 2024 and try to keep going with that. And that's just
that's actually a great strategy.
Yeah.
And it's something that I'm sure others may wish to emulate.
I like it. It makes me a better geographer, and I think it will make them better geographers if they choose to adopt that particular strategy.
With about a minute to go here, you've already given us quite a bit of advice for prospective geographers, but I'm going to ask you to think about a significant bit of advice you would like to provide a future graduate student in geography, one that might be entering Berkeley or the University of Nevada or LSU or Syracuse or Penn State or wherever. What advice do you have for a prospective geography graduate student, perhaps a PhD student in geography?
Let's think about two things. First is, do your field work, respect the field, and see as much as you can. That's item one. And item two actually relates back to this kind of conversation that you and I are having. Spend the time, expend the effort to find out what past geographers have done, read what they've done, learn about the field of geography itself, which has an incredibly interesting history, and incorporate that learning into your approach to going out and becoming a great geographer.
Paul, those are excellent bits of advice. I want to thank you for spending this time with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike, and we'll see you around.
You will. And this concludes this episode of Conversation with a Geographer. Thank you.
Thank you.